Okay, something has gone wrong in the dating market, not just in London, not just in the UK, globally. Marriage rates in England and Wales have fallen from 84 per thousand in May 1972 to 20 per thousand in 2022. The number of UK marriages has almost halved in 35 years. More people than ever are single. More people than ever say they want a long-term partner, and more people than ever cannot find one. This video is about why and about who the system has failed most. This is not a video about blaming women, but it is a video about what women were never told and about who was supposed to tell them and was not there. So I'm going to start off with the Fatherless Template. The psychological literature reaches a consistent conclusion. A girl's relationship with her father serves as a template for all her relationships with men in her life, romantic and otherwise. Not because fathers are infallible, but because the father is the first sustained male presence in a girl's life. He is where she learns, by observation, by daily interaction, what men are, how they behave, what to expect from them, and what to expect of herself in relation to them. Remove that template and the learning does not stop. It proceeds without that reference point. Add older brothers and the learning deepens further. A girl raised alongside brothers develops a normalized, non-romantic familiarity with male behavior. How men think, how they communicate, how they process conflict, what their silences mean, not from dating, from living alongside them. A girl raised in a two-parent household with a present father and older brothers has had, before she enters the dating market, years of low-stakes male interaction that calibrates her expectations to reality. A girl raised without that has not. That gap does not close automatically. So research findings. A girl's relationship with her father serves as the model for all her relationships with men. Fatherless daughters show difficulty with romantic relationships, psychological disturbances, and poor partner decision-making. Fatherlessness influences how daughters interact with and choose romantic partners. Fatherless daughters are more critical of men, making finding a partner significantly harder. Girls without fathers tend to seek partners to fulfill psychological needs related to the missing father figure, not a strong basis for selection. Children without a father face 4 times greater risk of poverty, are more likely to dissolve partnerships and have children outside of them. The court system in England and Wales compounds this at scale. Post-separation, the default maternal residency model means fathers become visitors rather than parents. Every father removed from a daughter's life by a court order is a template that was never built. The court does not distinguish between a father who walked away and a father who was pushed out. The child experiences the same absence either way. So let's take the London Underground as an example. Seats facing each other, you sit down and directly opposite you, unavoidably by the geometry of the carriage, is a stranger. That is the design, that is the situation. For most passengers, the discomfort is mutual and manageable. You look at your phone, you look out the window, you look at the floor. But for a man in 2026, that ordinary discomfort takes an additional psychological weight that did not exist a decade ago. The question he is now required to hold in his head in a mundane, daily, unavoidable situation is, if the person opposite me perceives my forward glance as intrusive, do I have a legal problem? What about the child 2 seats along? If I look towards the child, am I in a different category of risk entirely? The answer to both questions under the current legal and cultural environment is possibly yes. So the man looks at the floor, he looks at the phone, he manages his eyeline with a deliberateness that is psychologically effortful in a way that would have seemed absurd to any previous generation. And he does this not because he's a predator, he does it because the cost of being perceived as one in a system that prioritizes the perception of the victim over the intent of the accused is just too high. That is not a normal psychological state, and it does not stay on the tube. I'm going to touch on the legal framework. In 2021, Transport for London launched a campaign naming staring as one of the 7 forms of sexual harassment on the network. Under the Public Order Act 1986, the Protection from Harassment 1997, intrusive staring of a sexual nature is a criminal offence. Offenders have been convicted. Custodial sentences have been handed down. The law targets a real harm. Predatory, persistent leering is not acceptable, and the legislation exists for a reason. That is not the argument. The argument is about what happens beyond the intended legal boundary. The chilling effect extends far past the behaviour the law was designed to address. Men who would not leer are now uncertain about where ordinary human eye contact ends and prosecutable conduct begins. And that uncertainty in a system where intent is internal and unobservable produces a single rational response: withdrawal. I'm going to talk about the incel mechanism defined precisely. Before going further, a word about a word. The word incel has been colonized by its most extreme representatives. The ideology attached to it, misogynistic, sometimes violent, always corrosive, is not what this video is describing, and it is not what this channel endorses. That world is left entirely alone. But strip away the ideology and what remains is a simple observable mechanism: sustained systemic discouragement of male engagement that produces male withdrawal. That is not a theory. It is a documented pattern in social psychology, dating market research, and marriage rate data. Okay, so incel, defined for this video, is a man who has withdrawn from the dating market as a result of accumulated systemic discouragement due to legal risk, social risk, repeated rejection, and the absence of a viable return on engagement. Not a movement, not an ideology, a condition created by identifiable external forces. Incels are not born. The conditions that create withdrawal are manufactured. Okay, so those conditions include legal risk of approach and how it operates. Post-Me Too, cultural and legal environment makes approaching a woman in public carry social and potential legal risk regardless of the intent. And the result is men default to apps or withdraw entirely from real-world initiation. The tube dynamic, how it operates. Unavoidable proximity in public spaces requires active psychological management of ordinary eye contact. The cognitive load of self-monitoring in mundane situations is significant. And the result? Defensive protective mindset becomes the baseline. Normal behavior feels like a risk. Discouragement. Children in public places. How it operates. A man who looks towards a child in a public context may now experience the same risk calculus. The ordinary human act of noticing a child becomes a source of anxiety. And the result? Further withdrawal from normal public engagement. The entire public sphere becomes a minefield of perception. The social media trap. How it operates? Ordinary male conversation patterns, directness, humour, challenge are routinely reframed in online culture as aggression, harassment, or toxicity. And the result? Men learn that engagement itself carries reputational risk. The safest option is silence. Discouragement mechanism, dating app rejection accumulation. How it operates? Dating apps produce high rejection rates for most men due to gender-skewed matching dynamics. Repeated failure without feedback loops produces learned helplessness. And the result? Men disengage from apps too. Both channels closed, isolation becomes the path of least resistance. The outcome is not simply that fewer men are dating, it is that the men most likely to have been good partners, cautious, socially aware, risk conscious, are disproportionately the ones who withdraw. Conversely, the men least likely to register or respect those risks are the ones who remain in the field. This is a filtering effect, but it is not filtering for quality. Okay, women are not initiating. Women are biologically and culturally less inclined to approach men. That is not a criticism. It is an established pattern in evolutionary psychology and consistent cross-cultural observation. The traditional dynamic has always been male initiation. If men withdraw from initiation and women do not initiate, both remain single. Nobody fills the gap. The dating market does not self-correct. It stalls. And the stall is not symmetrical. Women in their prime years who have the most to gain from a functioning market pay the highest price for a market that has stopped working. Okay, so the withdrawal loop. Legal and cultural risk discourages male approach. Men withdraw to apps or disengage entirely. Women less likely to initiate wait. Both remain single. The filtering effect means the men who stay engaged are proportionately those least deterred by risk. Not a reliable signal of quality. The organic, real-world meeting, historically the highest quality source of relationship, disappears. Dating apps present women with an unprecedented volume of choice. On Tinder, the average active user is presented with 140 potential partner options per day. No generation in human history has had access to that, and the research is now clear about what it does. It does not make selection easier, it makes it worse. So research findings show acceptance rate fell by 27% from the first to the last profile viewed. For women specifically, the rejection mindset also decreases the likelihood of actual matches. Higher partner availability, increased fear of being single, decreased self-esteem, and increased choice overload. Users receive the reverse of what they hope to obtain. Choice overload leads to decision deferral, dissatisfaction, and regret. 43% of UK app users feel overwhelmed. 34% report lowered self-esteem. Women and Gen Z most affected. 78% of dating app users report emotional exhaustion at least sometimes. The benchmark problem compounds this. One exceptional experience on the app, one man who is extraordinary in some combination of looks, status, and charisma sets a reference point that most subsequent men cannot match, even if they are objectively good partners. The exceptional man becomes the flaw. Every realistic man falls below it. The app economy profits from this state. An app that produces committed relationship loses 2 users. An app that keeps both users swiping indefinitely retains both. The incentive structure is built against commitment. Now I'm going to talk about the early 20s man trap. The abundance trap has a specific and predictable effect on partner selection. When women in their prime years, their 20s, when they have maximum biological and relational capital, are presented with overwhelming choice, they frequently select men in their early 20s. That is understandable. Early 20s men are often physically attractive, emotionally available in the surface sense, and socially proximate. Same age group, same social environments, same cultural references. But by most criteria that determine long-term relationship success, early 20s men are the worst possible selection for a woman in her prime who is thinking about her future. So let's do a reality check. Early 20s men, financially unsecured, early career, often in education or first jobs, cannot finance a relationship's baseline expectations. Why it matters for partner selection? Men are conventionally expected to fund the entertainment budget of early relationships. Dates, activities, shared experiences. An early 20s man typically cannot sustain this well or reliably. And next, emotionally immature, still developing emotionally, identity formation incomplete. And why it matters? Long-term partnerships require emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and consistent presence. These develop with time and experience. Next, not looking for long-term commitment. The majority of men in their early 20s are not in the market for a serious partnership. They are in the market for experience. And why it matters? A woman in her prime spending that window on a man who is not looking for what she is looking for is not making a relationship decision. She's making a social decision, but with relationship-shaped costs. Next, early 20s men unproven on every axis that matters. And why that matters? Potential is not outcome. The promise of what a young man might become is not the same as what he is. Selection on potential with prime years is a bet with high stakes. The woman who spends her early and mid-20s on men in their early 20s is spending her highest value years on the lowest return selection. When she reaches her late 20s and begins looking for something more serious, the men she now wants, established, financially secure, emotionally mature, have had years to develop options of their own. A lady's prime years window does not pause while the early 20s men mature, it runs continuously. So to summarise, the early 20s trap is where women in their prime select young men who cannot deliver what a prime years woman needs. The years pass, the young men mature, and then select younger women. The established men the woman now wants have developed their own options. The window has narrowed, the field has reduced, the pattern repeats. Next we're going to talk about the expectations gap. The channel position on this is direct, approvable, stable, ambitious, financially secure. A genuinely good man is objectively a better long-term option than an unproven younger man or a low-caliber older man. Low caliber is not a reference to income alone. Stability is multidimensional. It includes financial groundedness, emotional maturity, rounded as a person, genuinely fun and having good balance, and the capacity to be a good partner and eventually a good father. A man can earn well and still be low caliber. A man can earn modestly and still be high value. But a man who is unstable across most of these dimensions is a poor selection regardless of his potential. The problem is not that women want good men. The problem is a specific cultural framework that has actively framed the qualities that predict stability as threatening, too established, too sure of himself, not exciting enough, while framing dysfunction, immaturity, and inconsistency as authenticity. Next, I'm going to look at the accountability principle. The accountability principle is a woman who chooses a man who is not established financially, emotionally, in terms of character, must accept accountability for the lower probability of a successful long-term outcome. It is not condemnation, it is a consequence. The dice roll is her right, but the outcome of the dice roll is not someone else's fault. The triangle effect is the specific mechanism that traps successful women in their 30s. As a woman's income and professional status rises, her stated minimum expectations for a partner rise with it, or above it. Research consistently shows that women rarely carry men financially. A successful woman earning well typically excludes men who earn significantly less, and that is her prerogative. But the mathematical consequence is that her viable dating pool gets smaller with every increment of her own success. The higher she rises, the fewer men exist above her level. And at the top, the income and education distribution, the pool is very small. The men who exist there have their own options. They are not waiting. So the triangle effect in practice. Successful woman 30 plus wants an equally successful man, a reasonable expectation. But the consequence is the pool of men who meet that threshold is small. Men at that level have developed significant options by 30 plus. And next, she will rarely carry a man financially. Higher expectations across all dimensions, and the consequence, the pool narrows further with each additional criterion: age, height, income, education, ambition. Each one removes candidates. And next, her friend network is large and predominantly women with similar profiles. The consequence, social reinforcement of expectations without challenge. The peer group validates the criteria rather than questioning whether they are producing good outcomes. Her success and financial independence should rationally give her more flexibility, not less. But the consequence, the opposite happens. Success is used to raise the floor, not widen the aperture. The floor rises and the pool shrinks. And next, she's at or approaching the end of her fertility window. And the consequence is, the men she wants are aware of this even if they do not say so. Fertility is a factor in male partner selection, regardless of what the cultural conversation says. So the rational move for a successful woman who generally wants a long-term partner and family will be to use her success and financial security as freedom. Freedom to consider men who earn less but bring other qualities. Freedom to lower the income bar while maintaining the character and stability bar. Freedom to widen the aperture. Instead, the opposite usually happens. The floor rises, the pool shrinks, the years pass by, and the large, close female friendship network provides companionship without resolving the underlying situation. The female friendship network is not a substitute for family. It is comfortable, it is real, but it does not produce the outcomes most of these women said they wanted. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about primary years and the FAB criteria. Female fertility peaks in early to mid-20s and begins a measurable decline in the late 20s. This is not a cultural construct, it is a biological fact documented in medical literature. The average age of first marriage for women in England and Wales now exceeds 32. In 1967 it was 25. That is a 7-year shift, during which the years of peak fertility and peak natural attractiveness to potential partners are being spent on the early 20s man trap, the app cycle, and the triangle effect. A man clearly thinking about what he wants, specifically a man who wants children and a long-term family, operates with an awareness of this timeline whether or not he articulates it. It is not a conscious checklist, it is a biological signal. So the FAB criteria, what do men actually select for? Strip away the cultural noise, and the research across evolutionary psychology and stated wider preference studies points to 3 primary biological drivers in male partner selection, what I've called the FAB criteria. F for fertility is a woman in or approaching her biological fertility window. Men are not running a conscious calculation. The attraction response is biologically calibrated to fertility indicators, age, health, vitality. Why is it biological? Evolutionary. Men who selected fertile partners produce more offspring. The preference is ancient and operates below conscious awareness. Next, A for agreeableness. If a woman is warm, collaborative, and positive to be around, not submissive, agreeable, the capacity to build a life together, to resolve conflict, to be a genuine partner. Why is it biological? The practical. A family requires sustained cooperation. Agreeableness predicts the capacity for that cooperation more reliably than any other trait. And B for beauty. Physical attractiveness, symmetry, health indicators, presentation. Beauty is not a fixed standard. It varies across cultures and individuals, but it is consistently a primary driver in male initial selection. Why is it biological? Evolutionary. Beauty correlates with health and genetic fitness. The preference exists across cultures and time periods. Men will consider women of all ages, but a man who wants children must select from a woman of childbearing age. This is a biological constraint, not a preference. Beyond that, FAB criteria operates regardless of a woman's income, professional status, or educational level. This is the income exclusion asymmetry. Women exclude men on income and do so increasingly as their own income rises. Men do not typically exclude women on income. A successful woman who earns significantly more than a man is not more attractive to him by virtue of that success. It is neutral at best. The FAB criteria operates independently of it. A successful woman who hopes her achievement will expand her attractiveness to men in the way that income expands a man's attractiveness to women is working in a false map. The maps are different. A man's prime is different. A man's prime in terms of partner selection power extends across most of adult life in a way that a woman's does not. A man in his 20s who has not yet established himself, for most women, a risk. A man who's 30s who has established himself financially, emotionally, and in terms of character is, for most women, attractive. Often more attractive than he was in his 20s. A man in his 40s who has maintained himself and continued developing is still viable and desirable partner for women across the age range. This asymmetry is not fair. It is biology. The response to it is not to deny it, but to plan around it, which brings the young man into the frame. The young man in his 20s who is not yet established has a clear, rational path. Use those years to build financial stability, build emotional maturity, build character and roundedness, develop the capacity to sustain a future family and the entertainment budget of a relationship. Become the man in his 30s that women in their prime are looking for. The young man who spends his 20s as the early 20s man that women in their prime should not be selecting. Unstable, immature, focused on short-term pleasure, arrives at 30 with foundations. The window does not wait for him either. So in the early 20s, a man's position, still building, not yet established, should be focusing on foundations, finance, character, stability. A woman's position in her 20s, prime years beginning, peak fertility and attractiveness, maximum options. The window should not be spent on early 20s men. And in the late 20s, the men are becoming established, financial groundedness developing, emotional maturity building, beginning to be the partner women in their prime are looking for. And women's position in their late 20s, their prime years, still strong fertility. The best time to select an established or near established man, the clock is running. And in the 30s, a man's position, established. The prime partner selection power can attract women across a wide age range. His options have expanded with his development. And a woman's position, fertility beginning to decline, the window is narrowing. The triangle effect is most acute here for successful women. Selection decisions become more consequential. And for a 40-plus man, partner selection power sustained, if he has maintained himself, can still attract and sustain a family with the right partner. A woman's position in her 40s, fertility window largely closed for new family formation. Attractiveness to men who are seeking families has biologically reduced regardless of other qualities. So the selection decision, women obviously choose who they want. That is not in dispute. The argument is about what constitutes a good choice and what the evidence says about the likely outcomes of different choices. The channel position stated directly is, in terms of selection type, proven stable man, established income, demonstrated character, emotional maturity, genuine ambition, roundedness. What the evidence suggests, research on relationship stability consistently identifies these qualities as predictors of long-term success, financial security, and positive child outcomes. The likely trajectory, higher probability of stable long-term partnership, lower probability of repeating the cycle. If we next look at the unproven younger man, there's the potential, the excitement, surface emotional availability. What the evidence suggests, unproven means unproven. Potential is not outcome. The result depends on variables that are unknown at the point of selection. The likely trajectory is variable. If he develops well, good outcome. If he does not, she has spent her prime years on an uncertain bet. Next we'll look at a low caliber older man. Older but not developed, unstable across the dimensions that matter. What the evidence suggests, an older man who has not developed financially, emotionally, and in character by his mid to late 30s has demonstrated who he is. That is the information. Likely trajectory, lower probability of producing stable family outcome. He has had time to become what he is. The women who make the best selection decisions most consistently are those who grew up with present, engaged fathers who modelled what a stable, good man looks like from the inside. Not a perfect man, a real, flawed, present, engaged man. The women who struggle most consistently are those who grew up without that reference point, in a culture that replaced it with a framework designed to make stable male qualities look threatening, combined with a dating app system designed to prevent commitment and a legal environment that has made ordinary male engagement feel like a risk. The system has failed them. The honest thing is to name it. So in closing, the video has described the system, not a failure of character, a system. Remove the father, replace him with a court order, add a cultural framework that tells her male standards are repressive, give her an app that presents 100 options a day and is designed to prevent commitment, steer her towards men in their early 20s during the years she has the most to offer and the most to lose. Tell her career success would make her more attractive to men, knowing that is not how male selection works. Sadly, watch her prime years pass in the abundance trap, then express surprise when the pattern repeats. The childless life, or the one-parent life with a sperm donor of various types, is not the outcome most of these women were hoping for. It is the predictable outcome of a system that was never honest with them about how any of this works. First and second wave feminism fought for equality that was worth fighting for, the voting right, equal pay, legal protection. None of that is the target here. The target is the specific machinery that replaced the honest conversation about biology, about prime years, about what men actually select for, about what makes a good long-term partner, with a framework that produces predictable outcomes and calls them empowerment. The women who needed that honest conversation most were the ones raised without the father who should have started it. If this video made you think, please like and subscribe. Share it with somebody who needed to hear it, and thank you.